It is January 28th, 2025. And if there's anything that we've learned over the last 48 hours, it is yet another reminder that the United States is not ready for war with China. And I'm not just talking about your traditional boots on the ground warfare, I'm talking about the technology war that we're seeing playing out right now from TikTok to AI chatbots. I'm also talking about the trade war, as you have Trump with even more threats of tariffs, claiming that that is the answer to everything, as if he hasn't learned a single thing from his first term in office. We have a lot to cover because there is a lot going on right now. So let's get into all of the latest. As you may have seen, a Chinese startup released an artificial intelligence chatbot called DeepSeek last week, and it started gaining traction here in the US, soaring to the #1 spot on the Apple App Store over the weekend and overtaking the American classic ChatGPT. It turns out that the flagship model of the DeepSeek AI chatbot had capabilities that could surpass the rival models from OpenAI, Google, and Meta, and all for a fraction of the price, with reports noting that the price of DeepSeek's open source model is an estimated 20 to 40 times cheaper to run than comparable models from OpenAI, calling into question the trillions that US companies are spending on AI infrastructure. And that realization had major consequences for the US tech sector, especially for the chip maker NVIDIA, which dominates the AI data chips market here in the US. As a result, on Monday alone, NVIDIA lost close to $600 billion in market cap, which was the largest drop for any company on a single day in US history. The struggle was real for tech billionaires here in the US, whose collective net worth dropped by around $100 billion in a single day, with the CEO of NVIDIA alone losing nearly $21 billion. And who could have known, right? Who could have suspected this? Well, apparently there was at least someone who did suspect that there was going to be some upheaval in the US tech sector, and that someone was Nancy Pelosi. As on December 31st, she notably reported selling over 31,000 shares of Apple, valued between $5 million and $25 million, and 10,000 shares of NVIDIA, worth between $1 million and $5 million. And this is your reminder that the Nancy Pelosi stock trader delivered 54% gains in 2024, outperforming most hedge funds. Yet another reminder that members of Congress are still allowed to trade stocks here in the US. And sure, Nancy Pelosi herself may have not known that we were going to get a DeepSeek R1, but it is a reminder that we're in a situation where the tech companies here in the US have decided that they are going to create this AI technology at this price. And when you get another company, in this case, a Chinese startup, that comes in and that says, hey, I can do what you're doing better for a fraction of the price, it causes everyone, many investors here in the US, to freak out because they realize that the US is not the best in the business and that they have some serious competition. And it's not as if these tech companies here in the US can just catch up overnight, especially when it comes to the cost of it. And speaking of that cost, it was on full display last week when Trump returned to the White House and announced plans for a joint venture investing up to $500 billion for infrastructure tied to artificial intelligence by a new partnership formed by OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank. Meanwhile, here's this new model that was just created by a Chinese startup for less than $6 million. Yeah, to say that that should be a wake-up call for the entire US tech industry, and we can see the proof of that when we look at the stocks from Monday, that is an understatement. So much so that even Trump is saying it.
Today and over the last couple of days, I've been reading about China and some of the companies in China, one in particular, coming up with a faster method of AI and much less expensive method. And that's good because you don't have to spend this much money. I view that as a positive, as an asset. So the release of DeepSeek AI from a Chinese company should be a wake-up call for our industries that we need to be laser focused on competing to win.
But while Trump is talking about the importance of competition there, right? The importance of US companies getting back in the game and really taking on Chinese companies, we have to remember that that's not usually how the US does things, right? The US establishment, instead of looking at the question of how can we create a better and more competitive and cheaper and more cost-effective model, they look at this from the standpoint of how can we punish China for the model that they created, and or how can we seek to control that model? And there's no better example of this than TikTok, right? The app that is known for its algorithm. I have been a TikTok user for a few years now. I put some clips of my videos on TikTok, although they used to do better. I have some theories about the algorithm and the way that it has kind of operated, not just recently, but in about the last year and a half, I would say, is when I've seen a significant change. Whereas before, I would put videos that were either made specifically for TikTok or just clips of my videos that I'm posting on YouTube and Rumble and everywhere else. I would put them on TikTok and they could do really well. But now it feels like it is being shut out completely. That's neither here nor there. But as a TikTok consumer, right? I know the app for its algorithm because it shows you what you actually want to see. Whereas on Instagram, YouTube, these other apps, you can subscribe to a channel. You can watch videos from that channel. You can tell that algorithm, hey, I want to watch these videos. I want to watch this creator or this journalist or whoever it may be. And the algorithm still will not show you the content, right? It will specifically hide content from you that you have told that you want to see, just because the algorithm thinks that it knows better. Or as in the case with Facebook, they specifically decided that they were going to take the priority away from news content, that they were not going to show you news. Because at the time, Facebook was getting blamed for Donald Trump being elected in the 2016 race, and they were looking at a way to say, how do we tackle this quote unquote fake news? And so they came along and decided that they were just going to take news content out of your newsfeed. Well, for someone like me, where all I post is news content, then that really harms me and my page, because it doesn't matter how many thousands of Facebook users are telling the website we want to follow her, they still will not see my content showing up regularly in their newsfeed. So long story short, a Chinese company called ByteDance comes along, it creates TikTok, it puts it out there to the world, and American users, just as that they're now finding out with DeepSeek, with it soaring to the top of the rankings on the App Store, American users were quick to find out about TikTok and to find out that it had this algorithm that they really liked and that they really enjoyed using. On top of that, for creators on TikTok, the app came out with the creator fund, right? It's giving you all of these ways to make money on TikTok. And Instagram has been, from what I've seen, I do not make a dime off of Instagram, but from what I have seen, it has been a bit slower to kind of catch up to what TikTok was doing. Instagram has been more focused on, brand deals and kind of third-party funding that different creators and influencers can have access to. So TikTok has this model. Around 170 million Americans apparently enjoy this model because they're actively using TikTok. They're not being forced to use it by any means. And so the US government comes along and they get frustrated because, one, they don't have access to the data from TikTok. Two, they cannot control either the data that is collected by TikTok, the data from TikTok as a whole. They also can't control the content that is being shown to American users, which is another big thing we've learned, especially in recent years, as Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg has come out and admitted that the US government, the administration of the moment, in particular the Biden administration, they were literally telling Facebook what to crack down on, right? What speech needed to be silenced, what accounts needed to be taken down. And Meta was doing that. They were following orders directly from the White House. And the only time we heard about it from Mark Zuckerberg was now that we have a new administration that claims it supports free speech. And now you have Zuckerberg in this position where all of a sudden he's coming out and he's like, look at all the bad things that the Biden White House did to me that I fully went along with and did not push back on whatsoever. So instead of looking at this and thinking, okay, if TikTok is so popular, how do we create create and or how do we elevate our current American apps to be more competitive to TikTok, to where American users now say, I don't really want to use TikTok so much anymore. I'm going to go get on Instagram or whatever the other alternative is. Instead of doing that, Congress goes, you know what? Let's just ban TikTok, right? We're just going to ban the app. We're going to claim its national security concerns. We're going to quietly step over the fact that at the time that we're banning it, TikTok is the go-to place for a lot of content talking about the genocide that the US is currently enabling, that Israel is carrying out, targeting the Palestinian people. We're going to ignore all that and we're just going to act like we're banning it on national security concerns. Congress passes the bill, Biden signs it into law, and then the Supreme Court upholds the law because they seem to think that TikTok, social media apps, are comparable to a shirt that you wear, where if one shirt is banned, you just go get another shirt. I'm not even kidding. I wish I were kidding, right? I wish that we had a Supreme Court that realized what they were dealing with here. But alas, they either didn't realize it or they didn't care because it doesn't affect them. And now you have Trump saying that Microsoft is on the list of tech firms in talks to try to purchase the US version of TikTok, as he granted a 75-day extension to prevent the ban that went into place for about 14 hours. And personally, I think that a deal of some sort either has already been made or has certainly been in the works, based on the fact that the CEO of TikTok was literally at Trump's inauguration, sitting with all of the other big tech CEOs. And in addition to that, after TikTok came back after its little 14-hour hiatus, it has been different. And I mentioned before that the algorithm is definitely, it seems like it's gone through some changes in the last year in terms of what content is allowed to get views. But especially in the last couple of weeks since the ban officially went into effect, all of a sudden now phrases like Free Palestine are banned on TikTok. And so I think what we're going to end up seeing is eventually going to lead to the death of TikTok as we know it, right? If you get some US tech company in here to own, even if it's just the majority of it, I don't know exactly how they're going to structure the deal, but that is very heavily involved in that deal, then you're going to start seeing more and more of a rollout of censorship. And it's going to feel more like an American social media platform, like so many of the ones that we know and love, and so many of the ones that drove Americans to go get on TikTok in the first place. And it will never not drive me crazy that the US spends so much time talking about the importance of competition, right? We want to be competitive, we want free markets. And then their actions are the exact opposite of that, the exact opposite of free markets or actual legitimate competition, because the US tries to go about everything by force, right? They try to just apply force to it, which is what we're seeing right now as you have Trump in a position where he's trying to force manufacturing, tech manufacturing in particular, back to the United States. As reports noted that Trump declared on Monday, he wants the manufacturers of semiconductors and chips, which are used in many high-end consumer electronics and sophisticated AI-powered technology and research, to open factories in the US, and that he plans to use the threat of high taxes and tariffs to force them to relocate. I will forever never understand Trump's obsession with tariffs. They are a tax on the US consumer at the end of the day. And when we're in a position where we're having this conversation about, we have all these AI chatbots and various software going on here in the US at a certain price, at a certain cost to create, look, China just created its own version at a fraction of the price and it's even better. And then Trump comes along and he's like, okay, well, let me just throw some tariffs on this, which means that it's going to cost even more on the US tech companies to create the software that they were already creating. And this idea that it's going to force manufacturing back to the US and that then those tech companies are going to figure out how to do it at a cheaper price. Yeah, that's possible, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to solve the issues that the US is dealing with currently. And on top of that, those tariffs are not making the US any more competitive. And before I get any comments, no, I'm not against bringing manufacturing back to the US or bringing any sort of jobs back to the US. I think that's great. I just think you have to be realistic about it. And I also think that companies should have the freedom to choose, right? If they want to do their manufacturing in a different country, they should be able to do that. They should have the freedom to do that. The US should not try to force their will on these companies and then kill them in the process. And it's such a reminder to me that, we look at the US versus China. And this is part of why I'm talking about this today. I know that, tech related things is not really my forte. This is not an area that I typically cover. But the reason that I thought that it was important to do a video on this is because it highlights the current tensions between the US and China. And if we're going to talk about the overall tensions, if we're going to talk about the US, arming Taiwan to the teeth, or trying to target China by targeting its allies like Russia, or targeting it in a number of ways, increasing the US military presence in the South China Sea, right in Beijing's backyard. If we're going to talk about all of that, then we also have to have a conversation about the technology war and all of the ways in which the US is struggling right now. And part of the reason that they're struggling, it's not that hard to figure out. The US has an outward focus, right? The US is an empire. At the end of the day, it acts like an empire. And its focus is all around the world, right? How many countries can we intervene in? How many governments can we overthrow? How much control can we have on the world stage? How many governments can we have in our favor, doing what we want with the deals that we want? And how do we keep all of those countries away from our competitors like Russia and China, right? We see it every single day with US foreign policy. This is how it operates. But we have to remember, China does not have an outward focus. They have an inward focus. They're looking at how can we repair things at home? How can we improve our infrastructure? How can we improve the daily lives of our people? And then after they've had that inward focus, then that's when they start making deals with other countries. That's why you have China in Africa saying, hey, we want deals that are mutually beneficial. We want to work with you. Versus the US, which does no focus on its infrastructure whatsoever, has no focus on what do we need at home, how many people are homeless living out on the streets every single year, how many schools and other buildings are just falling apart, how many roads are falling apart, right? How many issues do we have here at home? The US is not focused on that. Instead, when they look at Africa, they see what can they do for us and how do we need to threaten them to get what we want from them. The US deals in violence and in force, in death and destruction, and it acts like it is exporting freedom and democracy, right? It acts as though there is so much freedom and the US wants all of its friends and allies and partners to have free will. Do you think Ukraine feels free right now as they're forced to fight in this NATO proxy war against Russia, to do all of the fighting, to sacrifice their population for war with Russia? Do you think that they feel free? Do you think that, these major countries in the EU, that they feel free right now, especially looking at Germany? I mean, it had its own infrastructure, the Nord Stream pipelines destroyed by the US. Germany is in a position where there's nothing they can do. There's nothing they can do to get out of the rut that they are currently in. They are being fully controlled by the US, and that is the case for so many of these countries across Europe, that they've found themselves in this place where they listened to the US. They acted as though the US was their trustworthy partner and ally. They thought that Washington was going to treat them the same way, and they are now learning a very difficult lesson. And yet, here's the US wanting to act like it's time to compete with China, acting as though this is all about freedom at the end of the day. This is all about trying to be truly competitive. But in every place that the US really tries to all of a sudden compete with China, because they have such an outward focus, because the US is the one that is sending all of these jobs around the world in the first place, right? That is not working on what we have here at home, working on our infrastructure, working on our focus at home to make it so that companies are able to do all of their manufacturing here at home and able to afford it. Because of that, every time that the US tries to quote unquote compete with China, especially in the technology sector, as we're seeing right now, they end up looking ridiculous. And they show that they are not remotely prepared to take on China, no matter what the Pentagon or what all of the neocons in Washington seem to think they are going to do in the very near future. Instead, as they're over here trying to pick a fight with China, all they are doing is harming the American people and the American economy more and more. And that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also find Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/RachelBlevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.